Hello and welcome once again to the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. We're joined by 620 CKRM Agri-News Director Ryan Young, as well as SaskAgToday.com's Chief Agricultural Editor Kevin Hirsch. I'm Doug Falconer from GX94, Agriculture Director in Yorkton, and it was a busy week, fellows. Once again, the big news came Friday afternoon, or I guess late Friday morning, with the latest announcement for the AgriRecovery program for Saskatchewan. Kevin, have you had a chance to dive into it?
Yeah, the actual announcement that came out didn't have a lot of the details, except that the feds were going to put in money to AgriRecovery and cost share with the provinces, and then they talked about all of their other programs. But this is going to take a bit for producers to wade through. Sask Crop Insurance is supposed to have details for people wanting to make application as early as next week. But the program covers 70% of extraordinary costs related to feed and freight. So the definition of what actually accounts for an extraordinary cost is going to be an interesting definition to see. You also, eligibility is area specific, guided by Canadian Drought Monitor. I'd assume a lot of areas would qualify, but that is another requirement. So the province way back when said it was putting $70 million in. The feds have put $77 million in. So eligible producers will be able to receive up to $150 per breeding cow or bull, up to $150. And then when the program is all said and done and they see if they've got money left over, there may be more than the $150 available. But producers will need to go online and look at what is considered an extraordinary cost and go through the permutations that they need to in order to apply to the program.
Would you say it's kind of about time, Kevin, that the feds finally announced something? Because between August, when Saskatchewan made their announcement for their contribution towards AgriRecovery, and now there's that little bit of a gap.
Yeah, it's been quite a gap, and I guess it's probably a bigger federal process to go through to get approval, and they also probably wanted to align with both Alberta and BC to have some semblance of continuity across the three provinces. So can probably guide them a little bit of slack in that regard. But it is different than the program back in 2021 that was pretty widespread. Just $200 per head was available, at least in Saskatchewan, without a lot of extra bookkeeping. And in this case, they also have to make sure that what they're applying for, that breeding animals, that they will keep it to January 31st of 2024 at least. So they're also putting in a herd retention aspect of the program. But the Sask Crop Insurance website, saskcropinsurance.com, has all of the details that are currently available, and the application should be out, as I understand it, with more information next week.
I had a look at the map, Kevin, and it's kind of a V shape in Saskatchewan, all the way from Lloydminster. Anything north of Lloydminster, they wouldn't qualify, but basically all the way down to Regina and south, they would qualify. Regina itself doesn't. Apparently, they had a lot of rain. Here in Yorkton, for instance, we qualify, but only about half an hour to an hour northwest of here toward Foam Lake, they don't qualify. So yeah, you'll have to take a look at the map. And obviously the rain was pretty patchy this year.
Yeah, that's interesting, Doug. I hadn't seen the map. I didn't realize that was available. But that will be important too, because if you're not in a designated drought area, you're no sense applying, I wouldn't think.
Also, a question would come up too. Say if a farmer is in that borderline between, the area that would qualify and area that wouldn't qualify, what would happen with them?
Yeah, there's always, when you start drawing lines, it becomes difficult. I know a premise ID is also required, and every livestock producer should have that. So whether they're just going to go by the premise ID, or whether you can make application and say, no, that's my premise, but I farm, or most of my ranch land or most of my grazing land is located further away, that's actually in the designated drought area. All of those details will have to be determined.
Sounds like a lot of paperwork involved in this.
Yeah, you're gonna have to show those receipts for extraordinary expenses.
Another big news that came out today was the final Saskatchewan Crop Report of the year. And it looks like harvest is almost wrapped up in Saskatchewan. They're saying 98%. What's your take on that?
Well, what I think probably the most left is still in your neck of the woods, Doug. It looks like there's a higher percentage east central than anywhere else.
Yeah, we're only 94% here complete. It's 98% province wide. So I'm not sure how the other ones break down, but yeah, there's still some to go here because we keep getting these little shots of rain going through, and it's some pretty short windows for combining right now.
This was their final crop report, and they updated all of their yield estimates. And I was actually surprised that there was a few crops that they increased their yield estimate versus what they were publishing as of October 2nd. But on most crops, they actually dropped their yield estimate a bit as compared to previous estimates. And I was a bit surprised at that.
And Ryan, for your side of things, it looked like harvest is pretty much wrapped up in that Regina Moose Jaw area. I know you've been going on a few road trips.
Yeah, it looks like, from what I could tell anecdotally from being on the road a lot, harvest is pretty much done. I know I did see one crop over in the in Singer area in my travels this week that there was one guy that didn't have his crops done. There was still a lot of rows of swaths. I'm not sure if he's going to use that for feed or not, but other than that, harvest is pretty much done around Regina Moose Jaw. Again, there's kind of just the odd shower here and there that kind of prolongs things, but pretty much done overall.
Manitoba's crop report came out this week as well, and 90% province-wide, 95% in the Northwest region, which is basically from Russell up north to the Paw. My guy that I talked to, James Fry, says grain, corn, and sunflowers, what's holding up the province of Manitoba right now. That's crops we don't see a whole lot of here in Saskatchewan, do we, Kevin?
No, there's very little grain corn. You see quite a bit of corn being grown for either silage or for grazing corn, but grain corn is a very small acreage. And soybeans is a eastern side of the province crop, but much bigger in Manitoba than here. So yeah, different cropping patterns certainly, especially as you get into the eastern side of Manitoba.
Is it a different soil composition? Is that why sunflower and corn is growing there a little more than here in Saskatchewan? Or?
Yeah, they seem to have the better results with that. Of course, the soil zones actually wrap around laterally. So, you know, the southwest of Saskatchewan is the driest traditionally, not every year, but the driest traditionally. Then the brown soil zone wraps around that. Actually, both Regina and Saskatoon are in the dark brown soil zone, and then the black soil zone actually covers all of Manitoba. So they're quite a different climate zone, and as you move east into the Red River Valley, their moisture is not usually a limiting factor, and their growing degree days is really what makes a difference for making corn successful. We just don't always have in most parts of Saskatchewan enough growing degree days to let grain corn mature properly.
And a couple of other items came out of Ottawa this week, a couple of private members' bills. And I know, Ryan, you were following up on the one, I guess, out of the Bill C-234, the grain drying and heating and cooling of barns. There was some big news came out of that on Thursday.
Yeah, that's correct. That came from the Senate Ag Committee for this week. There was a couple of major amendments that were introduced by Quebec Senator Pierre Delphont. One was to keep grain drying exempt from the carbon tax and exclude heating and cooling barns. It was a small margin of a vote, 7-6 in favor of the amendment to keep grain drying exempt from the tax. And that led to some furious debate between Liberal and Tory senators. There was one Tory senator that was accusing two others who were critical of the bill of being childish and filibustering the bill, preventing it from getting passed. So it was not surprising, the reaction, but nonetheless, it is a hot topic around these parts especially. The other amendment was to now that I'm thinking about it. The other amendment was the sunset clause, to reduce it from 8 years to 3 years, but that was defeated by a 7-7 tie. Now, up in the Senate, if there's a tie vote, that means it's defeated. So that's not going to happen at all. It'll remain at 8 years. What I kind of found interesting the most was the opportunity to comment before the vote. Alberta Senator Paula Simons, she was struggling with the First Amendment about excluding heating and cooling barns. She was saying that, some farmers in some parts of Canada, they're in unforgiving climates. You could use Saskatchewan as an example with our brutal winters. So she was kind of saying, like, they're forced to, adopt this model that doesn't really look after their needs. But when it came time to vote, she voted in favor of the amendment. So it kind of made me wonder whether, she just wanted to vote in favor and just to get the bill to move along and pass finally and get this over with, or I don't know what else was going on in her mind, but I found it quite interesting, the comments and then the vote afterward. So that was kind of the major development with Bill 234, and I'll be interested to see what happens from there. Kevin, when you heard the developments, what kind of goes through your mind?
Well, I guess it all reflects back to where we were with when we talk about the situation or what the carbon tax is supposed to do. The carbon tax is supposed to have us looking for alternatives so that we aren't using as much carbon intensity. But if you look at the original bill, it exempted diesel fuel and gasoline for farm use. So I hearken back to that. If diesel and gasoline are exempt from the carbon tax for farm use, I don't understand why propane and natural gas for heating and cooling of barns or for grain drying is not exempt as well.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that Senator Delphine mentioned as to why he introduced the one amendment was the old argument of there are alternatives for heating or cooling barns. He listed multiple. So yeah, it's just kind of a interesting little tidbit there.
Yeah, but like installing in-floor heating in an old barn isn't going to be easy. That's going to be probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for these people to upgrade to those sorts of things if they were, going to go through with it. It's mind-boggling how much it would cost.
Yeah, just not practical.
And of course, the other bill was introduced by Cody Blois. And that bill was regarding, I guess, making it provisional regulations for seeds and crop protection treatments and that sort of thing. What did you think of that one there, Kevin?
I think that's something that's long been needed. If you get, for instance, a genetically modified or a gene edited crop that isn't approved in Canada yet, but is approved in 2 other jurisdictions that have really good reputations, why wouldn't you give it provisional approval in Canada? My concern is, though, that if it's only 90-day provisional approval, I'm not sure that's enough for Canadian regulatory system to get its act together and get full regulatory approval. So that was my only wonder about when I heard that was introduced. But otherwise, I think the intent is very good.
And it seems like a couple of groups are kind of in favor of the bill. One example is the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. President Keith Currie called it a common sense, no cost measure, as well as it got some praise from the Canadian Canola Growers Association. So early on, a couple of groups in favor of that, and we'll see where it goes.
Anything coming up on the horizon next week?
I was thinking of Adam Picallo with PI Financial. I managed to call him late this afternoon just to get his thoughts on the canola and wheat futures and the outlook for the week. There was also another analyst that had the opportunity to listen to, Errol Anderson. He provided his thoughts on the Israel-Hamas conflict and how that would affect the markets as a whole, in addition to grain markets as well. And to get some additional reaction to the AgriRecovery announcement from groups like the Stock Growers Association, the Cattlemen's Association, get their take on it. That'll be some of the things I'll be focusing on for next week.
And Kevin,
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to interesting to have those details on AgriRecovery and see what the cattle industry actually thinks about it. And I think it'll be great to see your coverage of where grain prices are going, because canola slipped badly again this week. Many other crops are also slipping. Durum wheat is slipping when everybody thought that durum was going to be so short that it was going to go to the moon. We're in a situation where, compared to a year ago, the vast majority of crop prices are lower than they were a year ago.
All right, well, we'll be interested to see what happens next week. So I think that'll do it for this week's edition of the SaskAgToday.com Roundtable. On behalf of 620 CKRM Agri-News Director Ryan Young and SaskAgToday.com Chief Agricultural Editor Kevin Hirsch, I'm GX94 Agriculture Director Doug Falconer saying so long until next week.